Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we'll this Rosh Hashana Daf Chav Ches. We are going to begin on the very bottom of Chav Zayin and Beis, the last two words. Omer Rabba. Shama mixes tekiya b'bor. Let's say a person only hears some of the sounds in the pit. Mixes tekiya al svasabor, and then other part of the sound of the shofar on the top, by the edge, yatsa. Mixes tekiya kodem shalom shachar. Mixes tekiya al achar shalom shachar. Lo yatsa. However, if you heard it during the nighttime and then some of it at night in the day, that's not acceptable. So Amalei Maishna Hasam Debina Kula Tekiya B'chiva Maleka. How come we said that person only hears half of it during the day, half at night? That's not good. But Hakanami being the Kula Tekiya B'chiva Maleka should be the same thing when it comes to hearing the sound of the shofar improperly by the pit. So Hakashna. Hasam over there, that's not the time at all at night. Those are actually in the pit. They are actually able to fulfill the obligation, as we saw in yesterday's daf. Is that to say the Sabra Rabbah that he holds, the Shama Saif Tekiya below Techilas Tekiya Yatza, Umameo Techilas Tekiya below Saif Tekiya Yatza, that if you hear only part of it at the beginning or you hear at the end, that's good enough, even if you didn't hear the other parts. Tashima, but we learned, and this is Shachavatar we saw in yesterday's daf, Takabir Shaina, if a person blew the shofar at the beginning, Umashach Mashni, and he extended it, but Kishtayim so long that it could have been like two different notes, Ein Biyado El Achas, Umavamai, why is it considered only one? To Salikli Batarti, why do we say it's split it up like two? Where it says Nabsuki to Kiyasa Behadadi Lo Paskinan, we don't divide it up. It's considered to be like one. In fact, it's long, like two, it's still considered as one. Tashma. Hatakeya, and this is actually the route we saw in yesterday's daf. When he blows the shofar, into these different things, cisterns or pits, if you heard the actual shofar, yatsa. If you heard the echo, then you're not. Why not yatsa by hearing the echo? After all, before you actually heard the echo, you heard the very, very beginning. So you should be yotza by hearing the very beginning. So it must be that hearing the beginning and not the rest is not good enough. So where it says no kikam aramba but it's talking about the person blew the shofar himself. It says Rashi, then achar imo l'tseisbo, there's no one else there to fulfill the obligation. He did everything proper, the beginning and the end. At the beginning, he and the shofar are in the pit. And we saw previously on yesterday's daf, that anyone who's in the pit has fulfilled their obligation. So if that's the case, remember what's the chiddush? So madatema zimdim mabmigration bikati shofar babor. They call him arviv kol kamashvalon. You would think, what happens in a situation where he may be out of the pit, his head? However, the shofar's in the pit, therefore there's still a mixed sound. We're not concerned with that. Rabbi Yehuda. When it comes to the shofar of a carbon ola, which Rashi says v'tol shoy michayim, that you detached it while it's still alive, because if you did it after the zrika, there would be no longer din me'ila, because the oira the hides go to the kohen. So lo yitka, you should not use that as a shofar on Rosh Hashana. Even talk yatsa, but if you have it, you're okay. However, shofar shel shlomim, when it comes to carbon shlomim, lo yitka the imtaka lo yatsa. According to this point of the Gemara, you have not fulfilled your obligation when it comes to a shlomim. So my timer, oila bas me'ilahi. When it comes to a carbon oila, you can violate me'ila by using it. But since you did use it, so therefore now it goes to chulin, therefore you fulfilled your obligation. Shlomim d'labini me'ilanin, who, when it comes to shlomim, it's not considered to be me'ila, as Rashi says, the ein me'ila b'kachim kalim el be'emurim l'achar zrika. Only its sacrificial parts after it's been sprinkled. Only in that situation, hu derachim b'hu nafik l'chulin, since it doesn't go to chulin, therefore you're not yaitza. So Maskav Rabbi, that's the case. Amos Mayel, when did a person ever violate me'il? It's only busted in taka after he actually blew the shofar. So ki kataka be surtaka. How is it acceptable by the ola? When he blew it the isser. So Ella Omer Rabba, you're right. Even mine only you're not yatza. Then finally Hadamar he retracted completely and said 180. A person does not get hana for the sake of doing the mitzvos, or the mitzvos are not for the sake of getting hana, and therefore the reality is you are yatza b'diavad for using not only an oil, also a shlomim. For that matter, when it comes to avodah zarah, you shouldn't do it, but b'diavad you're okay. However, when it comes to the shofar of a irnidachas of the city which worshipped idols, in that case you have not fulfilled your obligation. Which is also the same spar in the Stach Sukkah in the third parak about the wolf and the esrog. There has to be a certain measurement. As we saw in yesterday's daf, the shofar has to be big enough that it can be the size of your hand and you can be seen on both sides. And since technically it's supposed to be completely burnt and destroyed, therefore it's like it's not here. Amar Rava. Because you're not getting hana, so therefore the reality is you could have that person blow a shofar for you, even though you made a neder not to derive benefit from them. For that matter, you say, I do not want to derive benefit from this object, also. Yom Rava. This is actually question 9, asking a person who makes a hana from his friend, are you mutter to blow a shofar? Yes. Also over here, to sprinkle the mechatos on this person, that's okay. Daf can be most like the shamim when it's cold. However, in the summer months, where a person will actually, as Rashi says, the ika hanas guf, you also enjoy that sprinkling. You'll feel good on a hot day, so you're not able to do that. For that matter, the same thing goes as follows: Amudar hana mimayin toivo bo tefillah shel mitzvah. A person says, I do not want to use this body of water. So a person could still use it as a mikvah. Only be milsei geshama, only milsei chama. Again, not in the summer. Sholach liyavu de shmul. Kafu ba'oichel matzah yatza. If a person is forced to eat matzah, that person still fulfills his obligation on eating matzah on Pesach. Kafu man. So what exactly means forced? Ilim a kafu shade doesn't mean a shin dalad forced in Vasanya. Itim cholim itim shaita. If sometimes a person is sane, sometimes they're deranged. Kishu cholim, when you're healthy, harihu kapikeach l'chol davarav. Shu shaita, when a person is a shaita, harihu kashaita l'chol davarav. So if a shade overtook him, it's like being a shaita. So Omer Ravashi shikafu parsiyim. It means that the Persians or some other person forced you to eat this. To yatsa. So Omer Rava zoisemes atakel shir yatsa. A person who blows the shofar just for music or just to learn how to do it to fulfill his obligation, even though he didn't really have the intention to fulfill his obligation. Pshita hanuhach. We'll quote the same thing. So when it comes to eating matzah, the Torah says eat matzah, and you did. You're forced to eat it, but at the end of the day, you did eat it. So we turn to Chasam Beis. Zikaron truksiv. Since it's a zikaron, you're supposed to actually have some type of a remembrance and thinking. Bahai misatzik ba'almahu. This person who's just blowing the shofar is not doing it as a zikaron. Kamashwan, he's still yaitza. Almak samarava mitzvah in tzrichas kavana. There's a famous sugya that we see from here that you don't need to have kavana. It says that let's say a person's reading the Torah and you get to the point of zman kriya shema. So im kivin leibu yatsa, v'im lamu yatsa. My love kivin leibu latzis. So it says beferish. The only time to fulfill your obligation of saying kriya shema is if you have intention. So l'chari mitzvahs do are tzrichas kavana. Whereas it's low likrois. You have kavanah to read. Likros akokari, you're reading. It means bekari l'hagia. This person is only proofreading the Torah, so this is not a proof. Tashma haya oiver achori beisach neses. How would our mission that we just saw? Person's passing a shul. His house is near a shul. The shama kosher hears the sound of a shofar called Megillah. So im kibul libel yatsa, im labu yatsa. My love im kibul latzes. So we see that's all totally on. Have to have kavanah. Well, lishmaya, it means you have to have kavanah to hear. Lishma hashama, you're hearing. The savar chamor ba'almahu. Maybe it's just some type of donkey that is making some type of a noise. So who knows exactly what you're hearing? Okay, maybe it's not necessarily a shofar. So esvei nischaven shemaya v'lo nischaven mashmiya. Let's say the shemaya has kavanah, but not the mashmiya. Or mashmiya v'lo nischaven shemaya. So let's say you have one person, the person blowing, or the one who's reading it, but not the other person who's hearing it. Both people have to have kavanah, the one who's doing it and the one who's hearing it. How's that possible? He thought it was some type of some donkey braying, right? So the other person who heard it may not have had any idea. It must be a situation where the person is blowing the shofar for music, right? And he's not yotz in that situation. So here we see this is a riot. Dilma deka menabach nevuche. Marvi, he's just barking with the shofar. What exactly does that mean? So if you look in Taisus, he quotes Perish B'Kuntrus the Enu Takea Kashir Tekiya. He's not doing it the proper measurements. And that's hard to understand because you wouldn't fulfill your obligation. Either way, okay. Ayin Taisus. A person who sleeps in a sukkah on the Shmini Atzeres, the sukkah is only supposed to be for 7 days. Shivas Yamin. Days was sukkahs, not 8 days. So what if a person sleeps in the sukkah, and it says Rosh, Shloshel Mitzvah, Yilke, you should get Malchus. Shahari Moisif al Mitzvah, Ever Mishum Bal Taisif. You're violating Bal Taisif. So, we should say such a thing. Sarmalono, Shani Oimer, Mitzvos, Enu Oiver Lehen, El Bizmanan. The only time you can be over Bal Taisif is Dafka in a situation where it was on that time. Says Rashi, for example, 5 minim of lulav, 5 totafos in your tefillin, 5 tzitzis, but in this situation, the Isser Bal Taisif would only be on the 7 days of Sukkot. The 8th day is Shul B'Zmanan. Shul B'Zmanan you cannot be over Bal Taisif. Meisif Rav Shemen Baraba, Menayim L'Koyin Sho'il L'Duchen, if you have a coin that goes up, Shul Yomer, he shouldn't say, Hoyel B'Nasna L'Tayra Rishos L'Varech Es Yisrael. Since he gave me permission to give them a blessing, I have a good idea, I'll say my own blessings too. You're not to do that. Since he finished the bracha, he finished the mitzvah already. He still violates Bal Taisif even Shol It's talking about where he didn't finish. I have a sani siyim, no siyim bracha achas, no sani siyim kol brachasav. It sounds like he finished all the brachos. So it's shlo b'zmanim, nonetheless he still violated Bal Taisif. No shani hacha, it's different over there. Kivan di ilu nisrami leit tzibura achrina hadim mevarch kul yom zmanehu. Because anytime he encounters a shul or another minyan, he could always say this bracha. So therefore it's still considered within his zman. How do we know it's still considered his zman? Dinan. Hanitanim b'matana achas, and let's say a person gives one gift, says Rashi, going dam b'chor, the blood of a b'chor, shnis ari b'dam b'chor, that got mixed up with other bloods, o b'dam meiser, it got mixed up with meiser behema. So you have hanitanim b'matana achas, shnis ari b'matana achas, yinanu matana achas. So that's not a problem. Because if there's only one blood application, even if they're two mixed up, it doesn't matter because they both have the same requirements of one blood application on the Mizbech. For that matter, matan dal b'matan dal, yinasu b'matan dal. If, let's say, it's supposed to be done on all 4 corners of the Mizbech, even if they're mixed up of different bloods, it's not a problem. For example, a shlamim, an osham, an oil, or a taida. However, the problem is matan dal b'matan achas. What if you have a mixture of one carbon, which is only 1 sprinkling, and that which is 4? So Belezer Omer Yinasim b'matan dal. Rabbi Shua Omer Yinasim b'matan achas. So Machlokas, should you only do 4 or should you only do 1? Because in there is blood that is supposed to be sprinkled 4 times. There's also in there blood is only supposed to be once. So Omer Rabbi Lezer says you're supposed to do all 4. He says Haru Oiver al Bal Tigra. If you only do 1, you're doing less, and therefore you violate Bal Tigra. Omer Rabbi Yeshua, what do you mean? How about you by doing more for the 1? Haru Oiver Bal Taisif. Similar Rabbi Lezer, lo never Bal Taisif el kashu b'atzmo. The only time you violate Bal Taisif is if it's for the thing itself alone, not if it's mixed. Rabbi Yeshua, lo never Bal Tigra el kashu b'atzmo. So you can say the same thing by me. You don't violate Bal Tigra if it's mixed. V'od, Rabbi Yeshua, furthermore, kishlo nasati avarta al Bal Tigra v'osisa masa biyadecha. So in that situation, you didn't actually do an action in your hands. You actually have done a sin act, and intentionally you've done the action of doing more as opposed to just doing less and like being passive. So it seems better to be passive and only do one. Now, b'halacha, this whole machlokas kivandi overlay matana min b'chor. Once you give one application of the carbon b'chor, overlay zmane, this mitzvah is done. So we see you can still be over Baal Taisif even Shol B'zman. For instance, Mishum De'amrina Kivandi Ilu Misrami Le Buchra Achrina Padim Ezel Mine Kul Yom Zmane. So it's the same thing, that the whole time it's Zman, because you could always do more sprinkling of other Karbanos B'chor. B'mai Dilmak Sabar B'Yeshua Mitzvos Oiver Alehin V'Afil Shol B'zman. Maybe he just holds that you could be over Baal Taisif even if it's not during its time. Anan Hakakaminan. Rav Shemin Bar Abba, my time is Shavik Masnisan. Why did you leave the Mishnah? Maisif Mibraisa, Lois Masnisan, Masnisan. My time alone Maisif. Kivan de Ilu, Misrami Le Bochrachrina, since you could always bring another carbon, Boy Maza, Mine Kul Yom Manihu, it's all considered like it's Zman. Braisa, which is about Birchas Kohanim, Nami kivandi imisrami tzibur achrina. If you come across another tzibur, zmani, it's still considered all one time. Rav Shimon bar Abba hasam loisagid yoiv. Over there, it's not good if you don't bring, but you must bring the carbon. Hacha iboy mavarchi lo mavarch. Right, iboy lo mavarch. You don't have to do it. Right, if you don't show up at this other place, you just don't have to keep going from shul to shul to keep doing brachas kohanim. Rabbi Omer Latzeis Lo Boy Kavana. So he changes it a little bit and says like this. To fulfill the a mitzvah, you don't need Kavana at all. La'avor, to violate Baal Taisif, Boy Kavana. And therefore, if you fall asleep in a sukkah, you didn't have Kavana, so you're not violating anything. I Baal Matan Damim or Yeshua the La'avor Lo Boy Kavana. There you're violating, and you don't need Kavana. El Omerava Latzeis Lo Boy Kavana. You're right, I'm still sticking to this. To fulfill your obligation, you don't need Kavana. Lavor Bizmana, to violate something in its time, Lo Boy Kavana, to violate it. However, Shlo, which is like the carbon b'chor. However, Shlo Bizmana Boy Kavana. Again, like sleeping in a sukkah on the 8th day, you need Kavana to violate Baal Taisif. That's why you're not over sleeping in a sukkah. So Amalei Rav Zera was Shamoy. As we continue the Chav Tesam Aleph, Yichavin Utakali, he said, as Rashi says, Nischavin Letkoya B'Shmiel Hoitziani Yedei Chavasi. He wanted, have me in mind. Al Maksaver Mashmiya Boy Kavana, as we saw before, that the one blow in the shofar needs to also have others in mind. Meisei Hayoiver Achor Beis Achnesa So Shahay Beis So Samach Beis Achnesa Shamakol Shaifer Kol Megillah Yim Chivin Libo Yatza Yim Labo Yatza. All you have to do is you're walking by. This guy has no idea that you're there. As far as he knows, you're not a member of that shul. So the im chivin libo might have a, why are you yotze? In the daita today, the person on the shofar doesn't even know you're there. The person who heard McGill doesn't know you're there. For instance, a very important site. When you're the shliach tzibur, you have everyone in mind, and therefore, even if it's someone achori beis hakneses, that also counts. Tashma. Nischavin Shomea v'lo nischavin mashmiya, nischavin mashmiya v'lo nischavin Shomea, lo yatsa, ad sheyischavin Shomea mashmiya. You have to have both the person hearing it and the one who's actually saying it to have kavana. Katani, what do we see? Mashmiya domina Shomea. Ma Shomea Shomea l'Atzmai yaf mashmiya l'Atzmai. Katani lo yatsa. So we see beferish you're not yatsa. So tanohi desanya Shomea l'Atzmai mashmiya l'fi darkai. Rav Yossi b'medber murim shliach tzibur. That shliach tzibur has everyone in mind. Aval b'yachid, if you're an individual, yo yatsa ad shechavin shemea mashmiya. In that situation, when it comes to a tzibur, you're right. Everyone holds that the shliach tzibur has everyone in mind. You don't have to have this special das for this individual. However, if we're talking about a situation where there's a yachid, then the din is different to machlokas. We're going to stop there. Let's see a couple questions. Hakol chayovin. Question 10. B'tkiyah shofar. I didn't do that yet. Question 8. Question 9. Hamoidu hana machavero. So we already said you fulfill your obligation by shofar as well, also by hazos mechatas. The only thing is not during mos hachama. Question TA12. Lamadi amar mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Him avar abal taisif sarach kavana. There's someone who do you need to have kavana to violate Bal Taisif? Well, maskana. So this is what we said. Question 12. Bismanoi, if it happens during its time, lo boy kavana, then you have violated. However, shlo bismano boy kavana. Again, like for example, sitting in a sukkah, sleeping in a sukkah on Shemini on the 8th night. In that situation, you have not violated Bal Taisif, because it's the shlo bismano, not during the time of the mitzvah, which is during the 7 days of sukkah. So it's the 8th day already. You're not going to be violating Bal Taisif unless you have kavana that you wish to be over to do this mitzvah above and beyond. Otherwise, you have not violated Bal Taisif.